We are live. All right, well, Kufar Akbar, welcome to another edition of the Cross and the Crescent discussion group. We are here every Sunday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. This is our second week back. Last week was kind of a disaster, to be honest with you. My internet kept, I don't know, we hadn't done the show for quite a while, and it kept lagging and having to log off, having to reboot. So today, we think we have that all fixed. We had a little bit of some issues at the beginning when I opened up the studio, and we had, of course, our IT specialist and our expert come in and tell me what I was doing wrong, because I've run a cable. I went out and I bought a cable, one of those Ethernet cables, Tuesday. I plugged it in and came and ran it down, through the kitchen, through the living room, down the hallway, back here to the office. Plugged it into the computer, and man, my speeds went through the roof. But when we got back on today, we started, Rad's telling me, well, you're still lagging. And I'm like, well, why? And so he's been jumping around, messing around with my system. I think he hacked my system. But anyway, I think we figured that out. My jitter was like 90 something, whatever that means. Rad knows what that means. I don't know what it means, but evidently had too many devices doing something. It doesn't matter. We're all fine now, and we're ready to roll. Okay, well, welcome everybody. We appreciate you coming in. I see the chat is filling up also, and thank you for that. And everybody here in the studio. Missing a couple people that are normally here, but eventually they show up when they get here at their own time. But this new time is kind of a hard thing to get used to. I know it's kind of unusual for me to have my entire Sunday afternoon to myself, where I can, take a nap. Relax after you get home from church. So I'm kind of liking the new time. Is that a new time all right with everybody? Is this kind of a hard thing to fit in? Anybody want to opine on that? Want to say anything important about that? It doesn't look like it, and that's cool. Okay. I wanted to mention one thing. I was sitting there watching the opening, the show intro. And again, thank you, Connie. I'm assuming this is Connie, the Rock on the Shot.
Yep.
That's Connie. Okay. Thank you for doing that. And there was a picture on there from the Holocaust. And it was, I can't really, what is that picture where was it clothes or a whole?
Yeah, it's clothes.
Okay. So they confiscating everybody's clothes, and they had these huge piles of clothes that the Nazis had accumulated at these camps. And I had traveled to, when I was stationed in Italy, this would have been 2000, around that time. We flew to Germany, got a rental car, and drove into Poland. And we went to Auschwitz. And if Auschwitz is made up of two camps, it's actually three camps, but there's only two camps left. And one is the old Polish garrison, the old Polish fort with brick buildings. And the other one is Birkenau, is where that large camp where they actually turned the killing of human beings into an assembly line. This is where they built those big gas chambers along with the crematoria, had hundreds, if not thousands, of barracks out there. But one of the things that I remember seeing when I was there, and this is why I bring it up, I know there's a caboose to this train of thought, is because in the brick buildings at the garrison at Auschwitz, they have a lot of the things that they collected from the prisoners on display. You have like a room full of prosthetics, and it's a room, and then you can walk into the room about 4 feet, and then there's this wall or this glass wall, and on the other side of the glass is nothing but what they collected from the Jews. And you have like eyeglasses. But the one that got me was the shoes. All the shoes that they had collected from the Jews. And you're sitting there looking at you're looking at this entire room full of shoes. I mean, it's stacked at least 8-9 feet high, and the room's probably 30 feet wide, and it's, I don't know, 15 feet deep, 10, 15 feet deep, and it's nothing but shoes. And you're looking at all these shoes that were taken from people. And you see this little pair of shoes, and I started to cry. I mean, it got me tears. I teared up because to think that they would take the epitome of innocence, the little people, and just like everybody else, treat them like everybody else. They would take everything from them, everything that they ever had or ever thought they were going to have, take it from them and kill them. And when we look at the numbers from the Holocaust, my goodness, the Holocaust numbers, 90% of the children of the Jews died. 90%. The first people to be selected out during the selection process were kids. Kids couldn't work. So they killed them. I don't know how you get any more evil than that. I really don't. But that is just one of the cold, hard facts and statistics when you look at, who they targeted, who were the first ones that were killed. They used them, of course, as slave laborers. And if you were able to work, they were going to work you literally to death. So anyway, thank you for putting that in there, Connie, and causing me to tear up again.
Yeah, it was hard to make too. Another video that was hard to make.
Yeah, it'll break your heart when you think of those things. Okay, so now we're back.
Real quick, Sharon, is that like a live camera shot from your house? Because you got something like in your trees. I'm just saying. It's looking.
It's just a picture I took of a walk that I take my dog.
Oh, okay.
It's in black and white.
Yeah, okay, because it looked like there's something like in the trees there. I was like, but anyway, I thought it was cool. But all right.
What is it? What is that?
You know what? I see that black spot, but it's just a picture.
It's growing.
I don't know how that black spot's why it's there.
Huh, okay. All right. Well, it's just a glitch. All right, I was just gonna say, but okay. All right.
Oh, okay.
It looks like a ghost. It's like the paranormal.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Or a bird flying through it.
They're coming for you, Sharon. They're coming for you.
I wouldn't be walking down that road anytime soon.
Duke will eat it.
Wow,
my dog's a boxer. He'll eat it.
Yeah. Well, well, you're braver than I am. Then I wouldn't get on that road. I see something like that. Okay, so today we're going to do two things. First, we're going to do an apologetic. We're going to finish up that slideshow that we had started last week. We didn't even put a dent in it, to be honest with you. But we're going to try to finish that up this week. And then there's also, where'd it go? What was the topic I was going to? It was, because what I want to do is I want to discuss some of the topics that I put in my book. And I'm not trying to promote the book or anything like that. Actually, it's kind of at the ground level where I'm just amassing my thoughts and just nugging out a bunch of stuff. But there's a couple sections in there, and one of them deals with the origins of the Quran. Where did the Quran come from? One of them deals with anachronisms. I've talked several times on this show. I don't know how many times we've talked about how anachronistic the Quran is on this show. And one of those anachronisms is the mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is in Jerusalem today on the Temple Mount. And I think once we get done with the slideshow on that deals with who wrote the Gospels, how do we know who wrote the Gospels? I think we'll jump over to that unless anybody has anything else that they would like to speak on or talk about. Just let me know when we get to that point. Okay, so let's. Okay, how do I do this again? Present, share screen, and okay. So now this is weird. This is real. Okay, here we go. There we go. I see what I was doing wrong. Not having confidence in this platform. I don't know if they changed things around or what the heck happened. But it just seems like everything's different. There we go. All right. So last week we started talking about the common Islamic objection of who wrote the Gospels. And we often heard this. I heard this. The first guy I did a debate with was a guy by the name of Nematullah, who was, I think he was from Afghanistan. He lived in England, London, England, but he was from Afghanistan. And he kept trying to goad me into this debate of, is God Almighty or something. I can't remember exactly what it was about. But he's going after me. We're on Facebook. He was doing Facebook Live one evening, and I'm sitting there watching it. I was at the treadmill at Planet Fitness of all places. And he's sitting there calling me out on this. I'm sitting on this treadmill. And he goes, "Oh, Eric, I see you out there. You come tell me who wrote the Gospels." So I slowed it down to a walk, and I started having this conversation with this guy while on a treadmill at Planet Fitness. You do the weirdest things. But anyway, his common objection, one of the common objections that we hear from Islamic polemicists is that we don't know who wrote the Gospels. Their objection is that the Gospel writers were anonymous. And of course, we don't have any surviving originals. But the fact of the matter is, and we talked about this last week, there's no other attribution as to who wrote the Gospels. Nobody else nobody ascribes the Gospel of Mark to anybody but Mark. Nobody ascribes Luke to anybody but Luke, Mark, Matthew to Matthew, and John to John. There's no other attribution of these Gospels. Now, you can get some pointy-head scholars out there to say, well, Mark's Gospel sounds a little bit different here, and it was written a little bit differently here. And then Luke, of course, we don't know that for sure that was actually Luke. The fact is that we do, because there's no other attribution for anybody else. And then plus on top of that, and what I'm going to go through again here is the testimony of the early church fathers. And then also towards the end of this, we're going to have the attestation from within the Gospels themselves that show who wrote what. Now, this is a chart that our sister Connie helped me modify. I, of course, downloaded this from the internet. I wonder if is that a copyright violation if I do that?
No.
No,
it's not.
no. It's all open.
Well, okay, here's okay. Let me just say this, because I've been forewarned that the channel is going to be attacked for its consistent. Well, he wouldn't use a big word like for its copyright violations. How we violate the copyright rules all the time.
Whatever, but you've been outed, so
I know.
you can challenge it now, so it doesn't matter. Continue on. Don't even worry about it.
Okay.
Oh.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. And there's Chris Claus. Hi, Chris. Welcome to the show. The chain of authorship. Is that what the chain of authorship? Yeah, exactly. Because what do they have? What do Muslims say? Oh, we have a chain of narration. No, well, we have a chain of authorship. We actually have a chain of people that wrote things down. Okay, let's go through this. Okay, we talked about Clement of Rome over here, who knew Paul, who knew Peter. We have Ignatius, who knew Peter and who knew John, and he was a friend of Polycarp. Polycarp knew John, and Polycarp also knew Papias. Papias knew John, and he knew Polycarp. So we see the connection here from the first generation of early church fathers. So you have actual apostles right here from Jesus Christ, and then you have those people who were trained by the eyewitnesses on on what happened during the life of Christ. And Clement of Rome, of course, is very early, and we went through Clement of Rome, and then we went through the three people that knew John: Papias, Polycarp, and Ignatius. Papias is very early, and we went through all the reasons why we know it was Papias, and he would be right here. Here's John, here's Jesus. So we have a direct connection of not narration, but authorship. That's a good word. I'm going to have to remember that one, Chris. I like that. Then we have Polycarp. Okay, Polycarp's probably the most prolific of the four as far as writing materials is concerned, and he trains Irenaeus directly. So here's Polycarp, and then down here we have Irenaeus, and Irenaeus is going to play a pivotal role here early, and then Ignatius and Ignatius. Oh, I forgot to. I'm sorry. Let me go back to this because it's important that we do this. Okay, Papias. See here, Papias. Where is it? Do I have it? I don't have it in there for Papias, but for Polycarp. Look at Polycarp cites, and this is when we look at who Polycarp is, folks. Polycarp's right here, and he is citing the Gospel of. Oops, let me go back. I'm sorry. He's citing the Gospel of Matthew, Luke, and John. The only one that he does not cite is Mark. And this is my personal belief. Why he doesn't cite Mark is because Mark was written in Rome, and because Peter gave John Mark, his gospel when he was in Rome. So he probably, you could make the case that he was not aware of it, or that it had not been widely. Well, that's not necessarily true either, come to think about it, because Matthew and Luke draw heavily from Mark. I'm going to have to look at that one.
Well, wait. So that's the secularist atheist point of view. I would put forth that Mark is the later gospel. Okay. In other words, Mark is probably the latest one. Because that actually used to be the view. And the reason being is because Matthew, John, and Luke portray Jesus as like divine, and then Mark was written to play him as a more human character to combat Gnosticism. Do you see what I'm saying? So Mark was I would say Mark was probably written much later than at least than all the Gospels combined. Now again, so you're sitting there saying, well, Matthew and Mark,
we're gonna have to agree to disagree. We're just gonna now. I think Mark. It's pretty clear cut that Mark was the first gospel written according to today. I mean, if you use but I'm saying if we use scholarship today too. What's that?
So you heathen heretic. Okay, go ahead. I'll let you continue in your heresy, but go ahead.
Okay.
Right. Never mind. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate it. All right. Okay. Tarp mentions. No, it's okay. Go ahead. I like the conversation. Why is this not going back here? There we go. All right. So here you have Matthew, Luke, and John is mentioned by Polycarp. And of course, Polycarp is a direct disciple of John or student John. Then we have Ignatius. And if you see Ignatius is right here, he's a direct disciple of John and also knew Peter. And he mentions right here Matthew, John, and Luke also in his letters. And then the next one is Irenaeus. Now, Irenaeus knew all three of the gospel writers, or the disciples of. He knew all three of the disciples of John. He knew Ignatius, Polycarp, and Papias. So he learned from them. Now, look what Irenaeus said. Irenaeus mentions all four of the Gospels. So we're talking just the second generation away from the disciples, where you have all four Gospels being attested to. And look at this, 24 books of the New Testament are already asserted as being in existence. And if they're being asserted as being in existence, that means that have already been widely disseminated. So here you have Irenaeus as this other link in this chain of custody. Now, he taught Hippolytus. Hippolytus, of course, was a bishop in Rome. And he was called the anti-bishop, or he was called, what was he called? The anti-pope. There you go. They called him the anti-pope, or the rival pope. And he wrote a 10-volume treatise called Refutation of All Heresies. And he includes, of course, all 4 of the Gospels. And then you get to, let's see here, facts of, okay, so let me just make sure we understand this clearly. Number one, we know that the Gospels were written early, and we've talked about this before. Rad, we've talked about this before. As a matter of fact, when did this happen? I went on Christian Table Talk. It was probably in August, I think. August, maybe early September, where I talked about why we know that the Gospels were written early. And if John, being the last Gospel written, Brad, was the last one to be written, we know that Gospel was written prior to 67, or at least latest 70 AD.
Right.
And the reason is if you go to John chapter 5, verse 2, John chapter 5, verse 2, John chapter 14. I don't want to be in 14. I want to be in John chapter 5, verse 2. John chapter 5, verse 2, it says, now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which has 5 covered walkways. Okay, so how do we know that this was written prior to 70 AD? Thank you for asking. We know that it was written prior to 70 AD because the Roman legions under Vespasian, I believe it was, had
Vespasian.
What?
Vespasian, go ahead.
Okay. He had laid siege to Rome, or not Rome, that other city, Jerusalem, surrounded it, and laid siege. Folks, they laid siege to Jerusalem for 3 years. They utterly destroyed that city, all the way up to the Temple Mount, and destroying the temple that was there. So when you talk about, I'm going to have to sneeze here in just a second.
There are actually golden fountains.
Bless you.
Bless you, Chris. There are actually fountains. Okay, with gold leaf. There are actually fountains in Rome with the gold that they took out of the temple. Seriously.
Yeah.
In Rome to this day,
they utterly destroyed the temple.
Yeah, there are these golden fountains that they have the gold leaf that they use to make the outside of the fountain with the actual gold that they took from the Temple Mount. Well, actually, it was the temple until they turned it into a Temple Mount. Yeah, they carried it away. They were not happy.
Yeah, but with this destruction, with the siege of Jerusalem, they destroy in the pool of Bethesda that it talks about in John chapter 5. I don't want to say it's a stone's throw away from the Temple Mount, but it's very close to the Temple Mount. So as Rome continually gets closer and closer and closer to the Temple Mount, which was what the Jews were trying to hold out at, they're destroying everything along the way. And they're destroying places like the pool of the Bethesda. Now notice it says, which has 5 covered walkways. It's not, those walkways are not going to be covered anymore if they're being laid siege to, and they're destroying everything en route to the Temple Mount. So John cannot have written the Gospel of John past 70 AD maximum. That would be the latest. So you could date that. I don't know when you could date it, but you could date it prior to 70 AD by that. And everybody agrees that the Gospel of John was the last gospel that was written. So when we start talking about Gospels were written early, that's one of the attestations to that. Also, Luke, we know that Luke was written prior to Acts. Acts ends with Paul's imprisonment in Rome in 62, 64 AD. So the Gospel of Luke had to be written before that. Luke draws heavily from Mark. Matthew draws heavily from Mark. So those Gospels are going to be dated much earlier than that. So the bottom line is we know the Gospels were early when we talk about that. Because one comes, the Gospels were written 60, 70 years after the event. No, they weren't. No. That's simply not true. And modern scholarship is demonstrating that. Okay, so these are the facts that we find from the early church writers that are repeated very often in all of the Gospels, or most of the Gospels. Anyway, Jesus conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of a virgin. A star announced his birth. He was baptized by John. He was humble, unassuming, sinless. He spoke the words of God and taught on the Sermon on the Mount. He had ointment put on his head by Mary. He was unjustly treated and condemned by men. He was whipped, suffered, and was crucified. He was what does it mean he was crucified? I mean, all the Gospels agree that he was crucified, and there's one book out there that says that he was not crucified. And where's Chris? Chris, are you here? I know sometimes he's got like
of course I'm
kids.
here.
Okay.
Yes,
hey,
sir.
I got a question for you.
Fire
Do
away.
you believe the Quran teaches that Jesus was crucified?
Do I believe that? Yes.
Do you believe that? Okay.
Yes. And
you believe that not because of 4:157, but because of what it says in chapter 3? Is it?
What it says,
just for everybody to clarify, 4:157 says that the Jews did not crucify Jesus. It only appeared to them. But chapter 3, it says the day I was born and the day that I died, I think is one of the go-to verses. And there's something else that goes along with that, isn't there?
Yeah, so the way that I started off with is I go to Surah 8, verse 17. And here it actually, Allah says, Muhammad, when you killed your enemies, now I'm paraphrasing, but it says, Muhammad, when you killed your enemies, it wasn't you that did it, it was me. So Allah is saying that it wasn't Muhammad that did it, it was actually him that did it. But the Muslims would have actually believed that in the battle they were killing their enemies. But Allah is saying that he's the one that did it. So I take that same typology and I move it over to Surah 4:157, where Allah is telling the Jews, and specifically the Jews in Surah 4:157, that they themselves are not responsible for the death of the Messiah by crucifixion. It was Allah that caused the crucifixion, not the Jews. I also go to Surah 3, verse 55. In Surah 3, verse 55, Allah says to Jesus, he mutawafika, Jesus, so he caused him to die and then raised him to himself to purify him of disbelief. Now, the only time that we see Jesus being raised to Allah is in Surah 4:158, of course, where Allah raises him after Surah 4:57. So if you take the context of Surah 3:55, where he's saying, I caused you to die and raised you to myself, and then we go to Jesus's own sayings in Surah 19, verse 33, where Jesus states, peace be upon me, the day I was born, the day I will die, and the day I'll be raised to Allah. That only conforms with the Christian view and conforms with what the Quran's telling everyone, that it wasn't the Jews that actually caused Jesus to die. It was Allah that caused Jesus to die. Then he affirms it in Surah 3, verse 55.
Okay. And
Alhamdulillah.
I knew you would be able to provide a great explanation of that. But let me ask you another question then. How many Muslims believe that?
You're going to be disappointed. I know that everybody's going to be disappointed out there, but maybe 0.0001% of Muslims, because if you actually talk to Ali Attai and or Shabir Ali, they would actually grant you that argument probably.
It's because they're all kafir Muslims, man. They don't believe their own Quran, what it says. They don't believe their hadiths. They don't believe anything. They just kind of make it up as they go, whatever they like.
I was talking to a Muslim last night on Clubhouse, and the Muslim stated that they were Sunni Muslim at the start, and then as soon as we started going to the hadith, They're like, well, no, you got to show me in the Quran. I'm like, whoa. Did you just become Quran only all of a sudden? Like, come on now.
Yeah, well, the point that I want, there's a method to my madness here, and this is why I wanted you to do that, is because you can make an argument. You can make an argument from the Quran that Jesus was crucified, and you definitely did that. However, the overwhelming majority of Muslims on the planet today believe that he wasn't crucified, because it's very explicit in 4157 that he did not die. He was not crucified. And so when we start talking about this right here, this commonality that we find in the Gospels right here, that he was crucified, he was whipped, scourged, suffered, and was crucified. All the Gospels agree upon that. As a matter of fact, all of history agrees upon that. So that was that's when we start looking at the proofs for the veracity of the Gospels and the Gospel writers. They all have this common theme within the Gospels themselves. They all talked about how it was Pontius Pilate and Herod who was the king and the what do they call that? I can't remember the name. There we go. Tetrarch. There we go. Tetrarch. I couldn't get off my tongue. The Tetrarch at the time. And we know that. I believe it's from the writings of Josephus. And I believe Pliny the Younger, maybe the Elder, has it in his writing. So we know that is a fact from the Gospels. We know that he died on a cross. And then we know, based on the Gospel testimony, that he was resurrected. All these things are within the Gospels. All the other Gospels provide for a physical body resurrection. They say that they appeared to Peter and others after the resurrection. He encouraged, of course, Thomas to touch him. He ate with him, so we know that this was a bodily resurrection. And all of the disciples were convinced that he had been resurrected from the dead. And after he was resurrected from the dead and ascended into heaven, and they received the anointing of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost, they became fearless. These guys did not care. They went out and preached the gospel and spread it. And you know, one of the great things about being a Sunday school teacher is that you get to pick the topic that you're going to teach. And we just started the book of Acts today in Sunday school. So it was it's fun. Anyway. Okay. And then they all say that Jesus ascended into heaven. What else we got here? That he was the Son of God. All things are subject to him and creation belongs to him. And then you'll have all the I am statements that we have in the Gospel of John. He is called Savior, Lord, and God. And let's see, he saves through his sacrificial atonement on the cross. And this salvation that we get is for the forgiveness of sins. And it is a gift of God through God's grace, and that he will judge the living and dead. Okay, so let's look real quick. So you see, as you can see, we have all these commonalities from the Gospels themselves. They all share, because one of the often things that people will start, I hear it on Clubhouse all the time. Going to Clubhouse just drives me. I don't know how you do it, Chris, but those people give me a headache. But to hear these guys incessantly complain and whine about, well, the Bible is full of contradictions. And when you actually try to pin them on a contradiction, first off, you have to ask them, what do you think is a good definition of a contradiction? Because as soon as you start pinning their ears to the wall on this, the definitions start changing and the applications start changing. And the hypocrisy, oh my goodness, the hypocrisy is, what is this? He would teach in scriptures, the Torah and the gospel. What does this mean? This is from the Quran, 348, and he will teach him the scripture and wisdom and the Torah. What's that? What are we talking about here? What is that passage about?
I'm thinking then that it's
Jesus about Jesus.
Speaking about Jesus.
Yeah.
I got a
teaching
question.
the scripture.
I got a question. So in all the Gospels, do we have anywhere where Jesus married a 6-year-old and had sex with a 9-year-old? I'm just
Negative.
negative. That's a negative on
Where
that.
Jesus did what?
Where Jesus
What did he
married
do, Ryan? What are you talking about?
married a 6-year-old and had sex with a 9-year-old? No, that's not happening.
No, not last time I checked. Anyway, Eric, in your slideshow,
No, it's
do
I
you?
know where it is. It's in the Injil. It's in the Injil.
It's in the Injil? Okay.
No,
I'm kidding.
no,
Go
no.
ahead.
The Injil, where it actually says that Jesus is God, is in chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. Don't get the Injil mixed up with that perverted thing that the Muslims think. Now, when a Muslim says that talks about the Injil, just tell them that Jesus does state he is God in chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. They just need to pull up the Injil and go ahead and read it for you.
I like that because I can't
And
prove it.
Exactly. That's and there was a guy that's.
Oh, wait a minute, Eric. Darcy said
Go
something.
ahead.
Darcy.
No,
Go
I
ahead.
said the same thing Eric did. Exactly.
Well, if all you have to, and this is the thing with the Injil, just have one remark from anybody in history, produce one manuscript where people comment about this Injil given to Jesus before the 7th century. Have one person come out and say Jesus was given a book, and in the Injil, and they might have a case. But the problem is that there's not one person in all of recorded history that I'm aware of anyway. Now, somebody might have been out there and might be still sitting in a cave out in the Hejaz someplace. I don't know. But nobody prior to the 7th century ever stated that Jesus was given the Injil, given a book. This is a contrivance of the Quran. This is something that they just simply made it up.
But Eric, it says in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I think, where it says Jesus told them to go out and preach the gospel. So very clearly he was given a book because he's telling them to go out and preach this book, right? Because no,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah.
That's just some of their arguments. For those of you in the listening audience, those are some of the arguments that we hear all the time, and it's just like, dude.
Well, that's and one of the. I think it was on Clubhouse one afternoon. Somebody, of course, these trained parrot. Show me in the Bible where Jesus says, "I am God, worship me," and I says it's right there in the Injil. And they're like,
yeah,
what
it
Injil?
is.
I said exactly what Injil. I'm saying it's in the Injil. If you can't say that the Injil didn't exist, then what type of testimony do you have?
With your slideshow here, Eric, do you also have the testimony from the early church fathers and certain other documents that name the writers of the gospel as well?
Say that one more time. Do I have the what now?
So like Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, Irenaeus of Lyons, Matorian Fragment, Justin Martyr, Papias of Hierapolis. Do you have their quotes or references where they identify who wrote the Gospels?
I don't have the direct quotes. I can get them because hold on.
Would you like me to?
I'll be right back.
I was going to say, would you like me to share my screen?
I have the answer to what happened.
Hold up. Okay, I have the writings from the early church fathers, and I've done, as you can see, I've done some reading in them, but I'll tell you, these guys, well, they're boring. I'll admit that. I mean, it's tough reading, but it can let me just rephrase it. It can be exciting reading a lot of the things that these guys have to say. But as far as the direct quotes, no, Chris, I don't have them. But I know what you could do. is you could actually send them to me. Uh-oh.
Do you want to put my screen up?
Uh-oh. He's got them. I just clicked on it. There we go. All right. There you go.
All righty. So proof of authorship. So as Eric has already said, we have a chain of authorship, not a chain of narration. A narration is a story told through generation. Authorship is something different. Would you rather stand on a story or would you rather stand on fact? We have the chain of authorship. So can Christians prove authorship of the four Gospels? So how do historians determine if a text is authentic? Number one, historians love documents from the time being spoke about. No one would disagree firsthand knowledge is the best. Number two, historians like to see multiple people writing about the same event, so multiple attestations about the same event. Historians also look at dating. This can be viewed in multiple ways: carbon dating, writing style, if the manuscripts were quoted by earlier people. And they also love a chain of authorship, documented, not hearsay. So again, as we said, the chain of authorship is documented, not hearsay. This is something that historians love a lot more than simply word of mouth. Now, the biggest claim that skeptics have is that the New Testament authors are unanimous. But is this true? And can we know what the earliest Christians accepted as sacred scripture? Of course we can. Tertullian of Carthage, around 207, says, the Gospels were written by Matthew and John, who were apostles, and Luke and Mark, who were apostolic men. Mark's Gospel is the record of Peter's preaching. We have Clement of Alexandria around 180. Now remember, people, we're going within 150 years of the death of our Lord and Savior. When people try to say that this is 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century, let's get the dates to where they're supposed to be. Our Lord and Savior died around 33 AD. This is 180 AD. This is 150 years after the fact. This isn't.
Okay, Chris, let me do something. Let me do something real quick. I'm going to show that graphic real quick, and I'll jump right back to you. Just so that people can see this. So you're talking about Clement of Alexandria, and then who was the other one? Tertullian. I thought I had him on here. I don't have him on here, but that's when we start seeing the direct chain. It's right there. All right.
All right, we're back up here.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we're back.
Yes, you're back up.
All right, here, let me go. Whoops. Let me go back a little bit, going a little too quick. So we just went through Tertullian of Carthage and Clement of Alexandria. Here says, Mark wrote his gospel. Matthew and Luke were published first. We got an argument here. I think that Eric has an argument with Clement of Alexandria because it says that Matthew and Luke were published first, not Mark. But John's gospel was the last one to appear. So I do have an argument, Radical also has an argument with Clement of Alexandria because he said that John's gospel was the first one, I think, and Mark was the last one, or whatever. Mark was the last one, I think he said, where Clement of Alexandria says that John was the last gospel to appear. Now we also have...
I'm just saying, okay, that I could make the argument that Mark was written last, and I think that, anyway, go ahead.
Alrighty, I had to poke fun at you. It's been a little while. So now we have 180. Again, Irenaeus of Lyons lived from 130 to 202. He identifies that Matthew's gospel was the first one written. That's two confirmed witnesses that Matthew's gospel was one of the first ones written. Mark, a disciple of Peter, handed down in his gospel what Peter had preached. Luke, a companion of Paul, recorded in a book the gospel preached by him And John, the disciple of the Lord, published a gospel. So here we have Irenaeus of Lyons affirming, again, the four gospel writers. The Matorian fragment in 170 identifies Matthew and Mark and Luke, the physician and the companion of Paul, wrote his gospel, and John, who is an eyewitness, wrote his gospel. So again, we have documented evidence of who wrote the gospels. Now, everybody also loves Justin Martyr, lived from 100 to 165. What an amazing apologist he was. And don't we all strive to be the apologist that he was? Now, he says here, Christians possessed the memoirs of Jesus, which were called the Gospels. These were written by apostles and by those who were their followers. Now, he doesn't identify the actual names of them, but he does confirm that the Gospels were written by actual apostles and people who followed them. So, of course, we have Mark and we have Luke who followed them, and we have John and Matthew writing their own accounts, of course. So we have confirmation of this in 150, again stressing 120 years within the death of our Lord and Savior. Now, getting down into Saint Papias of Hierapolis, lived from between 60 to 130 AD. He was taught by John the Apostle himself. He was the bishop of Hierapolis and referred by the name to the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. He wrote that Mark based his Gospels on Peter's preaching. Now, he identifies Matthew and Mark, and of course, he would affirm John, who wrote his own Gospel. But he doesn't mention anything in here about Luke. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Luke isn't the author. It's just he didn't mention him during this. Also, this is getting into, I think, what you were getting into. So what I'll do is I'll end the slideshow, because this is just quotes now from the early church fathers of the books that they quoted in their writings. And I think that you were going to Ignatius of Antioch, Clement of Rome, and Polycarp, of course, right?
Well, I've already mentioned Clement of Rome, Ignatius, Polycarp, and Papias. And the thing about Papias is, what a lot of people don't understand is, this is how history is done. A lot of people say, well, we don't have anything that set that he had written extant today, and that's the truth. We don't have his extant writings today. But the fact is that we have Eusebius, the church historian, who provides us with that information about what Papias wrote. And then you drop down from Polycarp, you go to Irenaeus, and then Irenaeus is the one that names all four Gospels. And then from there, you have the branch out where you have Justin Martyr, you have Clement of Alexandria, Hippolytus, all those other people, Tatian, that we all know. So we have, and I appreciate you doing that, Chris. Thank you. I appreciate that. We have a chain of custody. And a lot of the information that I got on this, not all of it, of course, but much of it, kind of the flow of it, comes from J. Warner Wallace's Cold Case Christianity. And if you know anything about law enforcement, you have to have a chain of custody to present any type of evidence in any case. You can't have a broken chain of custody, or the evidence cannot be entered into a trial if the evidence could have been tampered with or whatever. But the fact is that we do have this chain of authorship, as Chris mentioned, but we also have other things that we can look at to see that the authors of the Gospels are the ones that actually wrote them.
Well, if I could just add here, just go on that whole chain thing.
Came off mute.
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm not muted, but you're lagging again. But all right, we're gonna have to get into your network. We're gonna have to figure this out. But anyway, no. So just going on that whole chain thing, and I think this is something for Muslims that are listening. You need to understand, we have real unbroken chains in these early church fathers. We have a direct line, a direct lineage, okay, from the disciples, okay, to these church, from the disciples to the authors, to the church fathers who are testifying to this stuff. Okay, so we have the unbroken chain, and nobody says, well, Ignatius was, when he got older in life, he got forgetful, or Papias, when he loaned out books and then no, he borrowed a book from me and never returned it, or Irenaeus, oh well, he took one of my books and published it as himself, like you guys have, or whoever, one of the church fathers, well, they were only 9 years old, so they don't know what they were saying at that time. They were forgetful. I mean, no, we do not have these problems that you guys have when you attack your own hadith that you disagree with. Okay, we don't have these problems. We have literally unbroken chain of narration and attestation to who wrote the four gospels. Okay, period. Okay, and nobody says that they were older and forgetful later in life, or they stole stuff, or they plagiarized themselves, or they were 9 years old and too young to remember how old they were. You know what I mean? We don't have that problem. You have that problem. Okay? Repent, accept Jesus Christ, and seriously, denounce Muhammad for what he is. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think
Well,
I
we
have.
had one of the things that I pointed out when we. Go ahead.
I have the answer. The Injil must have been burned if it disappeared. Just like the original first Quran. It must have been burned.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was probably in that bonfire by Uthman when he went to compile. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Uthman burned it, so we don't have it. It doesn't exist. But also the problem is that
Eric?
nobody did before. What's that?
Yeah, which means if Uthman burnt. Yeah, which means if Uthman burnt all those stones, bones, leathers that had the original writing of the Quran, then it leaves Islam with no evidence of Islam at all. Because he burned it all. There's no evidence.
We've talked about that. Yeah, can you guys hear me? Am I still lagging? Am I lagging?
Yeah, you're lagging, but it's not too bad. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So the problem is that we did the history of Islam back in September, and we were talking about where's Mecca, where's the history of it. The Hadith, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, all those compilers of Hadith did not live. They lived 250 years after Muhammad. These things were compiled 250 years after the death of Muhammad, and it's all oral tradition up to that point. Or if it was written down, you have old texts that people have not verified in their in their possession, and they're saying, okay, well, we know this one is an authentic chain of narration. The fact of the matter is they don't know what is and what is not in a chain of what's the word I'm looking for? An authentic chain of narration. So this rating system that they say it's the science of the Hadith is bogus on the outset, because you can't tell me that these guys who lived 250 years after the fact know what is authentic and what is not. This would be the same as having a completely oral tradition for the United States history at the time of George Washington, the Revolutionary War, to now, and now we're finally writing it down, and we say, oh, okay, you can count on this history now because of the oral tradition that's passed this on. Lagging thing's killing me. I don't know what I want to do. Okay, so let's get back to the slideshow. Let me go add this back in and see if we can finish up Matthew. What I want to do now is I want to show how within the Gospels themselves, the Gospel writers leave clues as to who is the author of these books. For an example, let's look at the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew, of course, is mentioned by Papias, Polycarp, Ignatius, Irenaeus, and Hippolytus. All these guys, Papias, Polycarp, and Ignatius, are all students of John. Just to let you know how close these guys are to the originals, or to the original sources. Then you have, if you look at Matthew, we know that Matthew, being a tax collector, if you're a tax collector, you have to be able to take and maintain excellent records. So when you look at the Gospel of Matthew, it is a very organized piece of work. Then you get to other Gospels refer to the tax collector as Levi. Matthew uses his own name, so that's a good internal clue. Then he speaks of money more than any other Gospel. Well, now, why would he speak of money more than any other of the Gospel writers? Is because his whole life is pretty much tied up in money, the collection of money, and the disbursement of monies. So he's naturally going to do that. He's not a prominent disciple. And this is so important to understand. This is like when we look at who discovered the empty tomb. It wasn't John and Peter, it was women. Women's testimony in the first century culture of in Jerusalem was not trusted. So if I'm making this stuff up on the fly, I'm not going to say a woman discovered the tomb. I'm going to say John or Peter discovered the tomb if I'm just making it up and I'm not telling the truth. And the same thing is here true of Matthew's authorship. Matthew was not a prominent disciple at all. He's not, I don't even know if how often he's mentioned by the other disciples, to be honest with you, but he's definitely not mentioned as often as of Peter, John, and James. That's for sure. Now let's look at Mark. Again, Mark is mentioned by Papias, Irenaeus, and Hippolytus. Now, Papias was a student of who? Was a student of John. Irenaeus was a student of Polycarp, who was a student of John. And Hippolytus is a student of Irenaeus, and Irenaeus was a student of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John. So here you have direct attestation to Mark's authorship. He's also mentioned in Acts, was it two or three times? And he's mentioned in the epistles of Colossians, Philemon, 2 Timothy, and by Peter. And let's see, he claims Mark became the interpreter. Papias says that he became the interpreter of Peter, meaning that he was the one that was the scribe for Peter. And the early church unanimously agrees that John Mark was the writer. So when Chris was pointing out what the early church fathers believe, it is unanimous as to who Mark was in writing his gospel. Luke, of course, Luke is well attested to. He's mentioned by Polycarp, Ignatius, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian, and Origen. So he's heavily attested to. He's mentioned in Colossians as being the author of the gospel. He writes Acts in the same style, so we know that he also wrote Acts. And one of the things that we know about the book of Acts, it was written after the Gospel of Luke. And if Acts ends in 62 AD, then we know that Luke had to be written prior to that. So there we have a dating issue going on with that. Luke and the Acts both use specific medical terminology. So if Luke is supposed to be a physician, an internal clue as to who the author would be that he was at least at a minimum very familiar with specific medical terminology. And we see this medical terminology, these terms being used in chapter 13, where I believe this is the one where they were describing the woman. She has a back issue, and Jesus heals her. And then here you have another one in chapter 14, verses 1 through 4. Uses these medical terms. And these medical terms also continue into the book of Acts. Then the book of John, the Gospel of John. What is this? Luke is a geographical PhD. What is this? Geographical PhD, is it? Yeah, that would be the equivalent. Yes, I agree. 100%. 100%. What is, I'm just glancing down at the chat, memorized the whole Quran, couldn't read it, but oh, that's good. Okay, let's see here. Dragon is here. I wanted to say, give a shout out to Dragon. She always said, let me just say this about our sister Dragon. She, if somebody has we all have gifts. Paul talks about how everybody has different spiritual gifts. Hers is one of encouragement. She sends everybody in our Skype chats all of these great blessings at the beginning of the day and all these words of encouragement. And I appreciate you, Mr. Dragons. I appreciate you doing that daily. They are encouraging. Okay. So John was mentioned by all these guys, and he talks about the Last Supper, and he refers to himself as the one who Jesus loved. He claims to be an eyewitness. Now, an eyewitness, and let me just say this, and I'm gonna get off my high horse and my criticism of the Quran and why I don't think that Muhammad was okay. If you are an eyewitness to an event and you go to write about that event, normally you are not vague. You provide very specific information to that event. You give the devil is in the details type scenario. And when we look at the Quran, and if you guys don't have this book, I'm sorry, if you do not have this book, this is Dan Gibson's Quranic Geography. Get this book. I don't know how much it is. Somebody probably could post how much it is in chat. It's not cheap, but then again, it's not too overly expensive. In that book, he does an analysis of the naming of geographic locations and specifics that come up in the Quran. And it is as vague as a book can possibly be and still maintain any amount of authenticity or veracity at all. It's actually scary how vague it is as far as the places that it describes or mentions. But here with John, let me flip back to John here. I'm sorry. Flipping back to John, John mentions the number of jars that were at the wedding in Cana where Jesus turned water into wine. How long the man of Bethesda had been crippled. He mentions the name of the servant whose ears got chopped off by Peter. He knows the name of the guy that got his ear hacked off. And he knows the number of fish the disciples caught at Galilee. So all of these are internal evidences that he was an eyewitness. He identifies as the purpose of water. For the jars at the wedding of Cana, he tells us why they had them. Excuse me, I was hiccuping. He tells us that Jesus was in Jerusalem during the Passover. He doesn't tell us the name of the season. He just names the holiday. He said that Jesus fed 5,000. He talks again about the Festival of Tabernacles, the Festival of Dedication, where other writers might just say, well, it was winter. Well, he provides the specifics, which indicates that he was an eyewitness. And records Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified on the day of preparation for the Passover. And then we know that he had to be Jewish because all of the things, the internal evidences that he speaks about were heavily influenced or heavily emphasized by Jews at the time. And he also introduces Aramaic words like rabbi, Aramaic being the common language or the language franca in Israel at the time, or Rabboni and things of that nature. So John is attested. I don't want to get into this. Tatian mentions John Tatian, who wrote the Diatestron, affirms that John. Tertullian, we're getting into Chris's territory here, so we're doubling down on that. Clement of Alexandria. Here's a quote from Clement of Alexandria. John, perceiving that the external facts have been made plain in the gospel, being urged. And Tatian mentions the same authority. So when we look at the chain of narration, we don't have a chain of narration. We have a chain of, there it is, right there, chain of authorship, chain of custody, where you have Jesus who teaches John, Peter, and highly influenced Paul. And you have this chain right here, John to Polycarp, Polycarp to Irenaeus, Irenaeus to Justin Martyr, to Tatian, Clement of Alexander into Hippolytus, and so on and so forth. You have a direct chain from Christ to the early church fathers to what we have in our possession today. Origenless, Theophilus of Antioch, all these guys mentioned John as the, and here's the kicker, folks. you're not paying attention, look at the screen. Pay attention, look at the screen right now. Here's the kicker. Muhammad evidently mentions John as the author of John. When you go to the biography, the Sirah of Muhammad, it says on pages 103 and 104, among the things which you have reached me about Jesus, the son of Mary, stated that in the gospel which he received from God for the followers of the gospel, and imply a term to describe the apostles of God, is the following. It is extracted from what John the apostle set down for them when he wrote the gospel for them from the testament of Jesus, son of Mary. So the bottom line is that even some of the most trusted Islamic sources attest to John being the author of the Gospel of John. And I mean, I know it doesn't mention Matthew, Mark, or Luke, but here you have a clear attestation of an Islamic source saying that John is the author of John. And in this source, this is the important part, in this source, it talks about Jesus being crucified. It talks about Jesus claiming to be pre-existent
Yes.
with God. So all of these things, the divinity of Jesus comes out. A lot of people say that John has the highest Christology of Christ, and I agree with that. And you have the Sirah of Muhammad saying that John wrote John. You got a big problem. You cannot say that Paul corrupted Christianity. You can't make that argument if your own Sirah of your own biography of Muhammad is making that claim that John wrote that gospel. You can't claim corruption.
Yeah,
Okay,
we tell them that all the time on Clubhouse, and they want to do
what do they
the
say?
monkey jump. Yeah, they want to do the monkey jump again. Oh, well, it's not trusted, and things like that. I just got finished with a big old discussion with someone in the back channel, and that's what she was saying. No, we don't trust that. I said, this guy, it's Ibn Ishaq. I think I looked it up. He was in the same century, I think. Don't quote me, but I think I read that he was in the same century as so-called Muhammad. So I'm like, that this, you have to look at this and take it for value.
No.
But then they say, they want to say, well, we heard that he was not honest, or his locations weren't true. So I was telling her, well, you just don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You have some history there that you can look at in the same century as so-called Muhammad lived. So.
I'm going to put this up here, and then I'm going to address what you said, Connie. Is that book translated into Spanish or other Romance languages? I do not know. You can get onto Amazon and take a look. But I don't know. It's an excellent source to have, though, especially if you're interested in Islamic history and what happened with a lot of the things with Muhammad. And I'm going to just tell you right now, it's very damning. It has a lot of, it does not cast Muhammad in a very positive light. And what you were saying, Connie, is that Ibn Ishaq is thought to be the author of the biography, the Sirat Rasul Allah. But he lived a century after Muhammad. He lived over 100 years after Muhammad. So you're writing a biography of a guy that lived 100 years prior to. This would be like me writing a biography of, I don't know, you pick a figure, Teddy Roosevelt. And all of it is oral tradition. How are you going to trust that? And I can see her point, but the fact of the matter is that it's just like the believing in the crucifixion of Jesus. Even though you can make a case for not trusting it, or you can make a case for the crucifixion or the death of Jesus from the Quran, you can also make a case that that you can't this can't be trusted. But the fact is that they do trust it. Many of them, the overwhelming majority of them, do trust it. And even the worst thing about this is that we don't have anything that Ibn Ishaq wrote, because that was written down by a guy by the name of Ibn Hisham, who lived 200 years after Muhammad. So his biography is not finally compiled and published, or what we have of it anyway, for at least until the 9th century. So it's actually scary about the traditions that they use, or the sources that they use in order to come up with doctrine, to come up with the religious practices and what they believe and how to treat one another. It's really kind of crazy. Let's see here, Paul. You guys are having let's see. It will be it will be good. It will be good. That book is translated into Spanish or Portuguese, but I don't know if I could understand it if it's translated into Spanish. Okay, so I'm trying to look at your icon here. Are you from Portugal? Is that why you're saying? And you speak Portuguese, where you wouldn't be able to understand it? You can post it in the chat when you get time. Yeah, this is a good point. It's after the fact. It's a lot of them talk about the Hadith. The Hadith aren't compiled, collected until 250 years after the death of Muhammad. So if you use the standard Islamic narrative, the Sin, J. Smith stuff. Oh, by the way, he is offering another class at the end of the month that deals with where's Paul today? Paul's not here today. Deals with the historicity of Mecca and Islam itself. So I signed up for it. You can sign up for it. You don't even have to take it as a normal college class. You can do an audit, or as the one that I'm doing. I can't. Let's see. I speak Spanish, but I can understand. There's an audit student, and there's another type of student. The kind that I am. It only costs you $100 and some odd bucks. But I can understand Portuguese. That is an easy language for Spanish speakers. Okay. Well, I habla nada of that. Well, I used to be able to speak Spanish. Anyway, you use it or lose it. I wasn't very good at it. Let's just put it that way. I could get my point across. Same thing with Italian. All right. So let's get back to this so we can finish this up. All right. So we get away from the Surat Rasul Allah, and we're getting to where the originals are. Where are the originals? We don't have any originals. We don't even have a copy of 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 who's that? Who says that? Who's that guy that's an author? Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman says we don't even have a copy of a copy of a copy. And they cite Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman says we don't even have a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, like 10 different copies. But he was using hyperbole when he did that. A lot of people don't realize that. But anyway, where are the originals? The originals were destroyed. They were written on papyrus. Papyrus is a very fragile, brittle paper. So time basically took them, but also as Christians were persecuted, they were confiscated and burned. So you have that going on. And then plus on top of that, you have the Diocletian purge in 302 AD, which was probably the most brutal, if not, well, it was the most brutal persecution of Christians, where you either gave up your manuscripts, or they would throw you in jail and kill you. It was brutal. So they were destroyed. Number one, they were written on a very brittle type paper. Papyri does not last that long. But number two, the Christians were heavily persecuted, and the majority of the Christians were not rich enough to be able to purchase vellum and have them printed on like animal skins or things of that nature. So it's amazing that we have copies of them, any copies of all that predate the Council of Nicaea. It's amazing that we have any copies that predate that, but we do. The fact is that we do have P52. P52 is dated like 120 AD. It's not very big. It's not a lot, but it's a fragment of the Gospel of John. But we do have some things that indicate that they and that conform to the gospel that we have today. And then also this added
in perspective
that the Council of Nicaea codified a lie. Go ahead.
Can we put this in perspective? We don't have the originals from Plato's Republic. We don't have the originals of Julius Caesar, the Gallic Wars. We don't have the originals from anything out of antiquity, the Middle Ages, or pretty much up until the invention of the modern printing press. Okay, and even then, you're hard pressed for if you're a rare book person, you're looking for the rare book. Most of those are second or third printings that you're buying of Mark Twain, or you're buying of Melvin, and so on and so forth. It's very rare when you're going to find a first printing of anything from even the industrial age. But also, here's the thing: we don't have the original of the Quran. Sorry, we don't even have a copy of the original of the Quran because they were all burned. We don't even have a copy of the copy of the copy of the original Quran. Now, I will state this: we do have, okay, copies of the Quran closer and more of the Quran, okay, closer to, okay, the death of Muhammad than we do when we have in the first century. But there's a number of reasons for that. One, this was a persecuted church where the Muslims were not being persecuted. They had control of the printing, everything like that, so it was no big deal. Also, the materials that they were written on, as you stated, ours were written on papyri. Theirs were written on, pretty much animal skins, so on and so forth. Okay, but so we don't even have. Okay, but getting back to this, so we don't even have a copy of a copy of a copy of what's his name, the Hafs Quran, and Hafs was a known plagiarizer, was a known book thief, okay, and was to be unreliable. But yet you trust that Quran, but you would not trust any hadith attested to Hafs. But yet you trust this copy of a copy of a copy of Hafs Quran. Interesting. Just some food for thought out there for the Muslims who are listening. And just thought I'd throw it out there. Anyway, that's all I want to say. I return the show back to you, Harry.
Interesting. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Oh, well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Okay, so you have the copies after copies is, however, not in any sense similar to Chinese whispers. The writers copy what they saw before him. They did not hear it and tried to remember what they heard. And I agree completely with that. They had in their hands what was copied and given to them. So the oral traditions, the veracity of oral, say that, back then you had oral cultures that would pass on stories, narrations. But what is obvious is that those stories, as they are passed on, they become embellished. So this is what is in my book, is that, Muhammad, and according to the Quran, according to what he was supposedly given, it says that he was just merely a messenger. And the complaint is that, well, he hasn't provided any signs. He hasn't provided any miracles to authenticate his prophethood. And then when you get to the hadith, which were written and compiled 250 years later, he's like Harry Houdini incarnate. I mean, all kinds of miracles are occurring during the hadith, but nothing in the Quran itself. So there's a problem with that. Okay, let's finish this thing up. We're almost done. We're concluding. The conclusion is that there's more evidence, as Rad was saying, that for the Gospels than any other works from antiquity. And when we say that there's more evidence for the Gospels than any other work from antiquity, it is exponentially more evidence for the Gospels than any other work from antiquity. And when I say exponentially, we have 2.5 million pages of manuscripts, Greek manuscripts, of the Gospels. Think about that. We have like 5,600 copies of Greek New Testament manuscripts. When you start talking about Latin and Syriac, it goes up to 25,000 manuscripts of the Bible, where the most attested to work from antiquity, you probably have Homer's Iliad has like 9. I can't remember what the numbers are, but I mean, they're incredibly low compared to what we have with the Bible. But yet, can't trust that Bible. Dan Wallace, who runs the Center for New Testament Manuscript Studies, goes around photographing New Testament manuscripts, calls it an embarrassment of riches. We have early church father attestation saying who wrote the New Testament. We don't have to go looking outside of the church. And all of these are church fathers proclaim the deity of Christ. All of the gospel writers proclaim the deity of Christ. So if you can't believe the gospels, you can't trust anything from history. And that is the truth. Okay, who has anything that they want to add to this? Or if they don't want to apply, that's fine. Pile them up, bro. What's this? Of course, there's an oral tradition side by side. Yeah. Who unmuted himself? Who was that?
I have something to say too.
Isa. Isa made it again. This is 2 weeks in a row. Way to go.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, was that?
So I think this is really interesting, and I think it's a fair analysis, and I liked what Rad said. I think he was being fair, and I think it's really important. We want to be fair and transparent on the show. I think it's an important thing to do. I'm interested in kind of like the exploration of like apocryphal texts too, like how one could engage that spiritually speaking, you know, like dialogue of the Savior, gospel, the Nag Hammadi gospel, you know, like the Nag Hammadi texts and those things. Like I think because that's something that people will bring up, like we mentioned Gospel of Barnabas last time, and I think that would be an interesting thing to kind of reflect on at some point. I know this it's not maybe the best, but I think that's something to consider in Christian thought. I definitely think the element of persecution is a really important thing to look at and examine. And I think because nowadays people view Christianity as this kind of oppressive religion, you know, as opposed to like seeing like the roots that there was a lot of oppression in the community and the kind of the effects of that and the trauma that is from that. I think that's really important. And I think you kind of doing analysis of that is and having this conversation is important.
Yeah. And one thing you brought up the Nag Hammadi manuscripts. And let me see here if I have this here. Yes. Okay. This was in my book that I was writing, and it's currently on page currently on page 183. Anyway, lastly, we know. Okay, this is I'm glad you brought that up, Isa, because it's very important. Because when we start looking at this is critical to understand. When we start looking at sources that Islamic apologists will use to lend credibility or veracity to the Quran, they're not using the Gospels. They're not using Old Testament scripture. They're not using what is widely accepted by Christians and Jews. What they're using is apocryphal writings. What they're using is Gnostic writings or Syriac folklore or whatever. A lot of those they'll point to say, oh, well, look, you know, it says right here in the from the Basilides. The Basilides says that Jesus was never crucified. So therefore, we know that he wasn't crucified. Well, the Basilides were a Gnostic group that existed in the late 2nd century and were from Egypt. So therefore, you're not going to trust them. But yet they do, because what they do is they use heretical writings to try to demonstrate the veracity of the Quran. But in my book on here, it says this idea, and this is what I was going to pin Chris today on. You know, if you know, I would prefer to say, you know, instead of trying to say that, you know, Muslims, the Quran teaches that Jesus wasn't crucified, to leave that alone. Let them believe that, because when you start saying that Jesus wasn't crucified, you're denying the most attested to event from antiquity. You can't get better attestation than the crucifixion of Jesus. But we know where they got this idea from, and we know where 157 comes from, and it comes from how do you pronounce it? The Nag Hammadi codices. Let's see, the Codice 7 from the Nag Hammadi Codice. And it's in the 2nd treatise of the Great Seth. Let's see if I can bring this up on my screen here. The 2nd treaty of where did it go? Where did it
Oh,
go?
I love that
There we
one.
go, John.
You are a laughing stock. I've made you a laughing stock. It says over and over again. It's kind of funny. The great sense. Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. What am I doing here? Present. John, were you going to, I see you want to share your screen. Did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to show an interesting verse that looks like Allah commits sins or crimes.
What is this?
This
What is this from?
34:25. This is from the Quran.
Oh, okay. Neither shall you be called to account for whatever we may have become guilty of, nor shall we be called to account for whatever
Yeah,
you are doing.
read the one that says word for word, because that's Muhammad Assad. He's
Okay.
out there. But so it says, say. So this is Allah telling Muhammad to say this. Say, not you will be asked about what sins. Now, some translations say crime, because the word does mean crimes. So not you will be asked about what sins we committed, and not we will be asked about what you do. So my question is, who is we?
He probably has a mouse in his pocket. What verse is this again?
34:25.
What verse is this? 34. Because I want to bring up the transliteration. Let's see. 34.
Well, transliteration is right there.
25.
Kula tusaluna ama whatever. Just go to
34 what again?
34:25.
34:25. Why can't I remember those numbers? Oh, it's because I don't work with numbers like some people do. Yeah. Yeah, it's supposed to say, O Muhammad, to these polytheist pagans, you are not to be asked about the sins, our sins. Okay, so word for word, let's jump over here. Let me bring my screen up. No, that's not. Okay, so you're working with a rookie. I feel like I'm back in my rookie season again. Doggone ya. Okay, there it is. And it says, say not you will be asked about what sins we committed. Yeah, good catch. We committed. We will be asked, and not what we will be asked. Wow.
Well, I can't take credit for this was on Clubhouse, but it was very interesting. This was by Scott.
Oh, you're one of those that hang out there too. You're one of those guys that
I haven't been on there that much, once in a blue moon. But yeah, I thought that was kind of, and I don't know how me and Paul we missed it, or maybe we didn't miss it, but yeah, that's very interesting. Who is okay? Because we know it's Allah talking to somebody. Supposedly it's Muhammad, but who is it says you will not be asked what sins we committed? Who is the we?
Yeah, that exactly. It's the royal way, don't you say?
Well, but even if it's the
nothing to do with
it's a problem, because then that's saying that Allah commits sins.
Yeah, I guess that would include. I guess that would, right? Yeah.
So Allah commits sins.
There's one thing that they are consistently consistent.
Yeah.
In their inconsistency, in their application. Yeah,
Yes.
they're consistently inconsistent is what they are in their application.
You know, Isa brought up a good point. We should do a study on the Gnostic text and show and demonstrate why this stuff is complete gibberish. You know what I mean? Although I would say, Isa, the Gospel of Barnabas is not even a Gnostic text; it's a complete forgery. There is only Muslims that bring this stuff up on Facebook now and Twitter and whatever. The earliest gospel, the true Injil has been found. You always see that post like, what are you talking about?
No, I know completely what you mean. I completely understand. I'm just saying these are like alternative, like apocryphal things, like infancy gospel of Thomas. There's these other texts that exist that people will bring up, and I think you're completely right about the Gospel of Barnabas. It's a very confused type of text. I've read it, and I'm like, no, I think it's literature. It's important to read literature and understand the history of things, you know?
Right.
Like, there's apocryphal literature about Lilith. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but in the Jewish literature, there's, you know, these are interesting texts to consider. It's a part of history. And, Mr. Eric here is a historian, so history is a useful thing. It's important to understand what people think. That doesn't mean it's truth, but it's something interesting to consider.
Exactly. No, I'm agreeing with you. I think that would be a good study. Show why we reject these apocryphal gospels. And by the way, let you know, I went to the first Lilith fair because there was lesbians there, and they were not the kind of lesbians I wanted to meet. I'm just saying, I got beat up. It was bad. Anyway, I'll joke about that part. but anyway, no.
Okay. Good night,
so yeah. But that would be a very interesting study. But I did want to bring up one point because I just looked up Shakespeare. Are there any original Shakespearean manuscripts? And this is what Google has told me. There are no original manuscripts. Not so much as a couplet written in Shakespeare's own hand has proven to exist. In fact, there is no hard evidence that Will Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon, 1564 to 1616, revered as the greatest author in the English language, could even write a complete sentence. And that's from the Smithsonian.org website. So I find that pretty interesting. But nobody doubts Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. You know what I mean? Okay. Just kind of fascinated on that.
Yeah, well, it's the same methodology, and I agree. Nobody's going to doubt that Aristotle, Socrates, Plato wrote their works that we have today. Right. Nobody's going to doubt that, but yet they'll doubt the gospel writers. Why? Because the gospel writers hammer Islam to pieces and destroy many of the tenets of that faith. And I was going to comment about the Gospel of Barnabas. A lot of times when you get into discussions with Islamic apologists like this or about this topic, is that they will conflate it with the Epistle of Barnabas. And the Epistle of Barnabas does date back to, I think, the 2nd century, maybe as early as the 1st century. I'm not sure, but they'll say, well, look here's the Epistle of Barnabas right here, and we have this, and it says that Jesus never died, and that he believed in the oneness of God and all these things that the Gospel of Barnabas is supposedly supposed to teach, but they'll conflate it with the Epistle of Barnabas, which are two different works. And we know that the Gospel of Barnabas is a forgery. Why? Because it is anachronistic, and what we mean by anachronistic, it has things in it that did not exist in the 1st century. For example, casks, which are like barrels. They didn't use barrels to transport wine in the 1st century. They used jars. So to say that casks exist in the 1st century is completely wrong. They have Nazareth on the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. They have Muhammad, this is crazy, why they even believe it, as the Messiah. It said that Muhammad's the Messiah in the Gospel of Barnabas. So there's all kinds of reasons to reject the Gospel of Barnabas. But I think that probably would be a good topic, is to look at the sources for, well, I have it right here, as a matter of fact. We start looking at the original sources of the Quran. And yes, I've spent a little too much time reading through that Hamajama. But a lot of the work from that is in what I've been writing. But okay, so here's what I wanted to show. We have plenty of time. Let me bring this up over here. Okay, let's see what happened. What is going on here? Can you guys see that? It seems like there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
It was a very lovely blank screen.
It was beautiful white. Dude, I think we saw Muhammad in there. Muhammad was in that. It was all white. I'm just saying.
Okay, let me try it again. Let's see here. Where do we go? Present. Okay, Windows. There we go. And there. Okay, much better. Okay, so here we have in the Nag Hammadi Codex, which is dated to the 3rd century. Here's what it says. Narrated by Jesus. I did not succumb to them as they had planned, and I was not afflicted at all. Those who were there punished me, yet I did not die in reality, but in appearance, in order that I not be put to shame by them, because these are my kinsfolk. I removed the shame from them, and I did not become okay. Da 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 da. Then get down here. It says, "For my death, which they think happened to them in error and blindness, since they nailed their man unto their death. Their thoughts." Let's see here. It was not I. They struck me with the reed. It was another, Simon, who bore the cross on his shoulder. So when we look at the source for this idea that Jesus was not crucified, this is where they get it. This is where Muhammad got it. He got it from something that pre-existed, that is known to pre-exist Islam by 3 centuries, almost 4 centuries. How can that be? How can you have so many different similarities? And what I'm thinking about doing is actually taking this and juxtaposing it down onto a PowerPoint slide and having the two, doing a side-by-side comparison of 4:157, just to show the similarities between the two. And this isn't the only verse. 4:157 isn't the only verse that we have these comparisons of. It's all over.
What was that from? Eric, what was that from? That you just shared your screen from?
That's from the. It's called the Treaty of the Great Seth, and it comes out of the
No, I know, I know that you're sharing the Treaty of the Great Seth, but you wrote it out. Is that part of a bigger compilation that you're working on? I was just saying. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, that's part of what I have in the book, which don't be looking for it to be published anytime soon. I was looking at today to this morning.
You're the author of the book. The author of the book, dude. You are now the author of the book.
Right. Okay. So
Yes, you can call yourself an author now.
No, don't go there.
We learned that from the imam, right?
No.
Okay. Can't say it. You can't say it. They're banned from my show.
Do not invoke the name of the demon. I'm sorry.
I told you guys, don't go there. I'm trying to pull you back. What was I going to say? This morning. I got up early this morning, and hold on. Let me see if I can reach up here. I was thumbing through these 2 books. This one, Exposing the Truth About the Quran, volumes 1 and 2, written by our dear brother Usama Dakduk. And as I'm reading through these, it seems like, I'm trying to reinvent the wheel here. I'm trying to do something that has already been done. So when I started reading through that and looked at what Usama's written, because he not only has these 2 books, but I can't. There was 2 other books that he also wrote, that Exposing the Truth About Muhammad, and he goes through all the hadith. And I feel like I would just be regurgitating what he wrote in a lot of that. So I'm kind of rethinking the purpose and the direction I want to take this, because if you guys don't know who Usama Dakduk is, he's runs the Straight Way of Grace Ministries. Connie knows who he is. Connie knows him personally, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
Get over to his website and get his works. I mean, the guy is he's a treasure trove of information. And like I said, I don't want to duplicate what he's already done. So I'm going to take a look at those 4 volumes, which is, they're 300 pages each. So we're talking about reading about 1,200 pages worth of stuff. And I don't want to repeat what he had, but then at the same time, I'm really having a good time writing this. I'm having more fun than I should.
This is your own book. This is your own book. Make it yours. It's yours. Do it. You are the author of the book.
Okay. Right, but what I'm saying, I mean, if you're just saying what other people say, though, have
Everybody
said.
says what other people say. What does Ecclesiastes say? Everything under the sun has been done.
Right.
There is nothing that
Right,
has
you're
not
right.
been undone. Tell it in your own tale, in your own
Yeah.
way, and no, don't.
Well,
get
that's the thing that
discouraged.
sometimes you trying to talk myself out of doing it is probably what I was having a little pity party this morning with me.
If you do, I will travel to.
With
yes,
that.
no, yes, we will not. Anyway, I'll take that.
Okay. I don't think I have any. Oh, yes, I did. What were we doing? I was going to talk to you about, what was that topic? I had it. Come on. There was one here it is. Okay. So this would have been on page. Let me see here. That's the problem with this is you scroll through way too many pages. 40. Okay, I'm getting there. I'm almost there. And no. Wait. Going the wrong direction. Oh, was that it? Miriam and Mary. We've done that before on the show, haven't we? Where we talked about Muhammad thinking that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is the
sister of Moses and Aaron.
Yeah, we've done that. But when I tell you the methodology that I'm using for this is that I will look at the Quranic verse, and of course, we'll discuss and recognize the error in the Quranic verse, but then I won't let just my own judgments cloud over what the verse says. I go to every single time. I'll go to Ibn Abbas, I'll go to Al Jalalain, and Ibn Kathir. I'll go to those three commentators. To explain what the verse means. And when those three commentators explains and regurgitate the same error that Muhammad did, then you know that this thing is an error, especially when you juxtapose it against history. And the one that I have here is Moses and Haman. Now, it says in chapter 28, verses 5 through 8, it says that, and we wish to be gracious to those who are being dispressed in the land, to make them leaders in faith and have them heirs and establish a firm place for them in the land, and to show, here it is, ready for this, Pharaoh and Haman and their hosts at their hands, the very things against which they were taking precautions. So we sent this inspiration to the mother of Moses. So you have Pharaoh, Haman, and Moses all together. Suckle the child, for we shall restore him to thee, and we shall make him one of our apostles. Then the people of Pharaoh picked him up from the river. It was intended that Moses should be to them an adversary and cause of sorrow for Pharaoh. For Pharaoh and Haman and all their hosts were men of sin. Now I wanted to see here, is this the one that says the very thing? So we sent this inspiration to the mother of Moses. We shall cast him into the river, but no grief, for we shall restore him. Okay, because the Quran has the wife of Pharaoh drawing Moses out of the Nile, where the Bible has the daughter of Pharaoh doing, just one of the many biblical contradictions that the Quran has, that the Quran came to confirm, don't you know, that where it confirms it. So here you have Pharaoh and you have Moses, and can we all agree? Do we have a consensus according to the biblical narrative that the Pharaoh and Moses existed at the same time?
Yeah.
Yes. Go to the book of Genesis, or go to the book of Exodus, and we can all agree that the Pharaoh lived at the same time as Moses. Moses lived at the same time as Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Can we go to the Old Testament? Same Old Testament, and agree that Pharaoh and Haman lived at the same time?
No,
you're exactly right. We cannot. That is not biblically correct. As a matter of fact, it is factually incorrect. Now, let's look at let's see, Ibn Abbas says, and to show Pharaoh and Haman that their host That's were feared. So he has Haman and Pharaoh together. You go to Al-Jalalain. It talks about to show Pharaoh and Haman and their host, the variant. Okay. And then Ibn Kathir. Hold on. Let's see. Wait a second. Is this? I don't think Egyptian history. Compressed verse. The Haman also read in Surah. Okay. So he also appears in Surah 28:38. And Pharaoh said, "O chiefs, O Haman, to bake the mud." So he has Haman constructing the Tower of Babel, for Pete's sake. So we know that Haman did not live in the 15th century BC. Haman is a character, a biblical character, that lived at the time of Esther. And Esther lived in the 5th century BC. This was during, if I'm not mistaken, is this during the Babylonian captivity, where the Jews are in Persia?
Yeah,
Esther would have
Persia.
been, Esther would have been bad.
Okay. So here you have a character that is 1,000 years past the Pharaoh of the Bible, the Pharaoh, because there's a couple Pharaohs, because you have Pharaoh of Joseph time too, which is, a couple hundred years before Moses, but the Pharaoh's still there in 1500 with Moses. So how can you have Haman living at that time? Well, you could come up with a couple of rescuing devices, I suppose. You could say, well, this is another Haman that lived as an advisor to Pharaoh in the 15th century BC. And that's cool. You can come up with that, but you don't have any proof of it. And
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. They got to prove it.
H.G.
Right, you
Wells.
got to have you have to have evidence. You have to have evidence for it. What'd you say, Darcy?
H.G. Wells.
Oh, yeah.
The time traveler.
Yeah. There you go. He's a time traveler. Who knew? Yeah, but okay, so you have Haman. This is what we call, this is one of those anachronisms that we find in the Quran. It's anachronistic. It has an individual interacting with other individuals that lived 1,000 years before him. And like I said, the rescuing device, I've seen some doozies that I've read, because a lot of these things I'll go in and I'll go to like Islamic Awareness and other Islamic sites to see, what their, I don't want to call them excuses, but what their explanations of these are. And they've come up with, well, this was just another individual that worked with Pharaoh. The problem is that the name Haman is not an Egyptian name. So you can't say that this is an Egyptian guy, because it's a Hebrew, actually Haman is the Hebrew rendering of a Persian name from a different culture 1,000 years past. And then the other rescuing device was something on the line where they found a document having Haman and the Pharaoh together or something. I can't, it's bogus is what it was. And then they said that we know that this is the Pharaoh of what the Quran is writing about, is because we found a mummified Pharaoh that has salt embedded in the mummification material. And we know the Pharaoh drowned in the Red Sea when they were pursuing the Hebrews when they had the parting of the Red Sea. Well, number one, the Pharaoh is not recorded in the Bible as drowning in the book of Exodus. That's bogus. So we got that wrong. But number two, the reason why we would find salt in the mummification material is because salt was the primary material to mummify somebody.
Yeah, preserve the body.
If you look at it, they would cut all your organs out and they would stick salt in there to draw all the moisture, the remaining moisture in your body, so it wouldn't rot. So of course you're going to have salt there. But never allowing one to let the facts get in the way.
Yeah, Eric. And Eric, didn't they take that mummy, so-called of Pharaoh, and claim, hey, this is a miracle because it talks about this in the Quran, that they'll find the Pharaoh's body preserved. You ever heard that?
I've heard a variant of that. Yes,
I've heard that.
Oh yeah,
I've heard that The problem is that the Pharaoh they're talking about is nowhere near the dating. Is way off. And
Hello.
but we have plenty of pharaohs that are preserved, but not perfectly. Well, the pharaoh is perfectly preserved the way the Quran is perfectly preserved, decrepit and decayed. That's what I like to say.
Right. Yeah, if you've seen some of those mummies, I wouldn't say that's perfect preservation at all. That is anything but being perfectly preserved. Now you're preserved, but there's nothing perfect about that type of preservation. All right. And let's just go around the channel here. Does anybody have anything? Let's start with Sharon. Let's start with Sharon. Do you have anything that you want to add tonight other than your spooky little icon with the ghosts in the tree? Maybe she's away from the computer. That's okay. How about Isa? Isa, do you have anything that you want to add tonight?
Oops, I do.
Okay.
I think it's interesting, the concept of perfect preservation. I don't know why theologically folks want to hold on to that. I don't think that really has anything to do with faith. If you believe in God or a higher power, it's an irrelevant point. So it's weird to keep hearing that point. I think it's kind of silly, actually. If God is all powerful, all knowing, all seeing, all hearing, whatever, this is, I don't know. I don't think that's a relevant point. That's not how faith works. Faith doesn't work based on complete logic and rationality. So it's weird that you're like, oh, there's this perfectly preserved thing. I'm like, even if something is perfectly preserved, that doesn't mean it's true. Is the Yellow Pages perfectly preserved? One could argue that it is. So I don't see why people are holding on to this argument. It doesn't help their position.
Well, to be honest with you, I hope what they have today is perfectly preserved because it's full of holes, has more holes in it than Swiss cheese. So if you want to make the argument that you have a perfectly preserved document that has all kinds of errors in it, then you go ahead and fire for effect gunfighter. That's fine. And I completely understand. It doesn't seem like a good argument to say, well, it's perfectly preserved, so therefore, and it's not perfectly preserved, by the way. But even if it was, what I mean, who cares? You can keep making the same error over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. That doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And the same thing is with the perfect preservation argument. I get that. Okay, let's go with Connie. Do you have anything that you want to add tonight?
I want to see at the end Rad's little video. That's all, folks. Porky Pig. His little short video.
I don't know if I have that anymore. Hold on, let me let's see here.
That was too cute.
Wait, the holes in the Quran, dude. The closing.
No, I have. Let's see. What is this? I don't have that anymore. Did I ever upload? I did upload that at one time. I know I took down a couple of videos.
Let me find it for you. Hold on. I'll give you the link. But go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Let's go with John. You got anything that you want to add to this? Take away.
Not really, except I was going to say, when Muslims tell you that Ramsey is the, the pharaoh that supposedly lived during the time of Moses, the problem is if you look up how he died of old age from arthritic problems. He died like in his 90s. Kind of hard to envision a 90-something-year-old guy on the chariot chasing a bunch of Jews across the sea.
Well, you have an infant speaking from the cradle. I mean,
well, that's true.
I'm just saying, the age appropriate.
The guy
my
ate
goodness.
his
Okay,
Wheaties.
so I'll pick that up. All right. Thank you, Darcy.
Yeah, I have a couple
Darcy,
things.
do you have anything?
I have one,
Okay.
the Muslims have to figure out how to explain away all the abrogations in the Quran. And two, it's that question in YouTube chat, what's wrong with them for claiming it's a miracle for their pharaoh being preserved? And I lost that train of thought. But they need to figure it out and prove it.
Well, if
Lastly, you gotta read.
that
You
has been
gotta
perfectly
do your own
preserved. Is that what you're saying?
What?
Well, there's a guy by the name of Dan. There's a guy by the name of Dan Brubaker that has gone in there and analyzed a lot of the manuscripts, the Quranic manuscripts, and he has found thousands of variants within them. So the idea of perfect preservation is simply not true, and we can prove it.
Right.
That's not hard.
Yeah. Well, anyways, to all you listeners, do your own research, do your own reading. Don't just listen to us. We know what we're talking about, but you got to find out for yourself.
Well, listen to us. You can listen to us, but you don't have to believe us. And as a matter of fact, if we are wrong, if any of us are wrong on any point, put it into the chat. Post it. I don't take down comment unless they're blaspheming Jesus Christ. I do not take down comments about this show. I let them stand. I've actually received criticism for that. You need to take that down. I said, no, if they want to criticize the show, then let them criticize. But I would also ask that you email me for the link to the next show, to come on to the next show and tell us why we were wrong about whatever the details are. And I never get the email for some strange reason. All right. Dare I say, Rad.
All right. Well, I'm just to respond. Actually, I agree with Isa. Yeah. So just because you have something perfectly preserved, I can have a perfectly preserved counterfeit $100 bill, perfectly preserved, pristine, in its original wrapping. Okay, that doesn't mean that counterfeit bill is worth anything. As a matter of fact, if I try to spend that counterfeit bill, that perfectly preserved counterfeit bill, I'm going to go to prison. Just saying. Okay. So the concept of this perfectly preserved stuff is completely ridiculous. But I did find a video, so I'm going to share my screen here, and I hope you will let me play it for the closing. But we got to upload it to you so we can play it. Hold on. Sorry.
I probably still have it in the Google Drive. I'll just have to go grab it. But
right. Okay. Chrome tab. We're gonna share audio.
What is this video that you posted in Skype? Is this?
It's the 9 in Surah 9, dude. It's the Okay. If you want to share it.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Yeah. I don't want to play that.
You don't want to play that? Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Which one were you gonna play? You're gonna play the
9 in Surah 9.
Here we go, folks. All right.
All right. Do you want to say anything, or are we closing out with this?
This is too long. No, I have that. Here it is. Hold on.
Okay. Oh, you got that?
Where'd it go? Okay. I think so. Let me stop sharing. There we go.
Advanced student and specialist, that the standard narrative has holes. That's what
That's all, folks.
That'll work.
Excellent.
I was lagging. I lagged during the whole time. I couldn't see anything. It just my whole
really. Well,
Okay,
play it
I
again,
have the
Sam.
folks from. Oh yeah, I got the folks from the. Oh my good
Advanced
night.
student and specialist, that the standard narrative has holes. That's what
That's all, folks.
Okay, just so everybody knows, there is some background context to that before we go shooting off. Oh, look at here, he's promoting violence against the
No,
Quran.
don't need to explain it.
There's
Don't
a
need to
story
explain it.
behind it.
Leave it.
We're not going to get into.
Leave it as it is. Leave it as it is.
No,
Just saying.
we don't
Okay.
explain it.
Okay. All right, go ahead, explain it. Go ahead.
But just right there. Okay. All right. Central Standard Time. I'm not explaining. No, because that would require the mentioning of certain persons, and I'm not going to do that. So if you want to think that it's what's the word? I don't even want to get into it. Not even getting into it. We're just going to close it out. God bless everybody. We'll be back here next Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time with the Crossing the Crescent discussion group. If you want to come on, if you see this video and you want to come on and provide your opinions or critique of what we're saying here, you're more than welcome. Amen. We'll get you here. God bless everybody, and we'll see you at that time.
God bless.
Good night.
All right, God